looking at older games, this is something that the fighting game community has long done, where well, for years and years and years, we strove to achieve arcade perfect ports. It was about arcade perfect, right? And so like when there was a move from arcade cabs at Evo to consoles as the main platform for playing these games, there was some conflict. The whole idea of Fnatic playing on a Dreamcast controller for MVC2, right? And he was using macros that were built into the MVC2 Dreamcast port of the game. So nothing wrong rules-wise there, right? But people considered it an affront, right? And that was one of the hurdles that we came over as the fighting game community. But there was this idea. There's this idea of like purity of the game, of fighting games, and do we need that necessarily? Like, I look at the perfect example I think of is the classic emulation scene, where should you mod a game, say Gradius or R-Type, that slows down a whole hecton on original hardware, particularly the Super Nintendo, and could you make, people have made patches for these games where it removes the slowdown. Does that make the game better or worse? Is that not the true version of the game? I don't know. But maybe there is something that is better than arcade perfect. Like we look at Fightcade now, and the things that we're doing with Fightcade, the quality of life features that we're getting with Fightcade, with training modes and such. That was never intended in the original game. That's not purity of the game in terms of what we used to look for in arcade perfection. That's better than arcade perfect, right? And it's like, should we not go for that? I think we should. I think that's a good thing. So when it comes to like using macros, right? And I'm like, you have to look at it in a couple of lights. For purely players being able to play and entertain themselves, macros all the way. If you want like a 3-punch, 3-kick button or an all-button single button press, I'm down with that, especially if that's just you playing the game and you want to play it that way, freaking great. When it gets into PvP and when it gets into competitive settings, you do have to start asking the questions. You have to ask the question, is this a smart idea for competitive play? How does it impact it? And there are going to be degrees of how much it impacts it, and depending on your values, which we will be talking about next week, you're gonna lean one way or the other. It strikes me as something that opens up something that is skill gated to a wider number of people. And the problem is not the tool being used. Now people are having a problem with the skill gate. And for me, I'm like, whatever. Where if the skill gate is this, maybe let the skill gate be at the bottom and let people use it in the appropriate way. Having access to the tool doesn't mean you'll use the tool well and it'll make a difference. So I'm kind of like, let it fly for that kind of stuff. The fact that it's like a 1 or 2 frame window that you have to hit those buttons at the same time, otherwise it doesn't come out and you get something completely different. That is not an interesting skill gap, right? Like, that is not an interesting test in the world of a competitive fighting game for me. The fact that you can hit the 2 buttons within 2 frames or 3 frames or 5 frames, if you're going for that, let me hit the 1 button, right? Why do we value that, right? I don't know. That's the question, right? And it's like, for some reason, people are valuing the ability to hit those 2 buttons close enough and not the utility of what you're doing when you're able to hit those buttons, right? And so I think we can look at modifications to old games that remove those things that are meaningless barriers, right? Like, if we don't care about those barriers in terms of what we're playing and what we're doing with the game, then get rid of them. Like, I would rather them be artificially removed than for them to be maintained for some like misguided sense of purity. So